Okay, so while this is loading, just let me thank everybody for joining into the webcast today. I know everybody's got very busy schedules and we're about to hit the holidays, so thanks for indulging me and letting me talk to you about some of the cool things that I'd like to see happen in the world of e-content. Before I jump into that, though, I guess I should talk a little bit about myself here. And as you can see, I jumped on the Kindle pretty much right out the gate. I didn't buy it on day one, but I did have a first generation Kindle. And honestly, I fell in love with the device as a consumer. And I guess that's about 3 years ago now that I got it. I just thought it was so darn cool to be able to get a book delivered in a minute or two, any time of the day or night. And I also subscribed to the New York Times for a while there. And actually, I loved that experience too, although it kind of grew old on me rather quickly just because I think I wasn't getting the full paper and I didn't have the experience of being able to really click on things and go out onto the web as easily as I should have been able to. So, I kind of gave up on that. And actually, to tell the truth, before you assume that I'm here to bash Amazon on the Kindle, you're wrong. The truth of the matter is I'm not a fan of the hardware device. But I buy all of my eBooks from Amazon, so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment here. But after the Kindle experience, I decided that I needed something else, and so when I heard about Apple wanting to jump into the game with their tablet, the iPad, I couldn't resist. So, like an idiot, earlier this April, I remember standing out in the cold at about 5 in the morning to get in line outside the local Apple store, and was there probably one of the first 10 or 12 people to get one in Indianapolis here. And what's interesting to me is as I look back then on sort of my tendencies and user experiences, in 2008, I was a Windows laptop user, and my phone was a BlackBerry. And honestly, I felt everything that Apple made was kind of overpriced, and I sort of laughed at all the Apple fanboys. But within a year of that, I was a convert. So now I'm staring at a MacBook Pro on my desktop. I'm on my second iPhone, and as you can see, I went ahead and bought an iPad. And the thinking there too was, with 100,000 or so iPhone apps at that time, I thought, well, right out the gate, this thing's going to be pretty usable. So, I thought it was going to be a terrific experience, but in the immortal words of you too, I really still haven't found what I'm looking for, and so I'm kind of searching it out. And part of that has to do with this formula I want to talk about. And I'm talking today as both a publisher as well as a consumer. And my concern about where we are in the ebook world is that we're taking our print book content, by and large, and we're lowering the price, we're wrapping it with DRM, and we're calling it an ebook. And I just don't really feel like that's the way forward for the future. Now, I do agree that it's a terrific way for us to get incremental revenue out of our existing content, but I just really hope this isn't the ultimate goal here. And so what I'd like to propose, at least just for thinking purposes here, is a different model where we've got sort of two different layers, okay? And so on the left side of this screen, you see that it's kind of where we are today, right? So it's this cheaper, kind of quick and dirty, easy approach, where I would refer to it as sort of paper in e-format. And again, as I mentioned before, it's incremental revenue. It's nice. I certainly wouldn't walk away from it. But I think the future really lies on this right side, where we start to invest in a digital-first approach, which, as I mentioned here, is also pretty darn difficult. So you've got to take that into consideration. And also, you've got to build it with the platform in mind. And by that, what I mean is, today when we build books, we think a lot about ink on paper, right? And a digital-first approach really requires us to kind of push that aside and maybe even think about print as an ancillary product, if any at all, okay? So you've got to think about the capabilities and the feature set that come to you from a smartphone or an iPad, okay? And that's a totally new revenue stream, but I'm also not naive enough to not realize that it's also harder. It requires a different model, and we're not really, most publishers are not set up that way. So I think there's a lot of experimentation that's ahead of us. But another way that I kind of like to look at this is where we are today. And one of my favorite quotes about this is basically that early TV shows were nothing more than radio programs performed in front of a camera. And that's the image that I have on the left here. Okay? And I think that's where we are sort of in the genesis of eBooks here. We've taken our print content and we've morphed it a bit to make it available for the convenience of a smartphone or a tablet. But that's about it, really. We're not adding the value, okay? Now, and the thing that really kind of gets me about this particular slide is that image on the right, I'll bet to a lot of people, looks like nothing more than a scan of a printed page. And believe it or not, that's actually a screenshot from my iPad. So again, it just goes to show you how far I think we still have to go to get to sort of the same place that we are with television and movies and so forth. So when you look at this next slide here and you start thinking, back in 2001, that image on the left, it's pretty remarkable that just, 9 short years ago, this was state-of-the-art for MP3 players and for music. And everybody was kind of jazzed about the wheel interface, but look at it. It's got this clunky old LCD screen. It's kind of large. It was by today's standards, it's certainly pretty heavy, but at the time it was state of the art. 9 years later, or actually even less than 9 years later, when the iPad came out, which is in the middle here, I mean, what a huge leap forward. And I would argue that 5 years from now, the jump between what we see with the original iPod and the iPad is probably going to look kind of trivial. I think there's going to be even bigger jumps ahead here. And that's what's exciting to me. So my big question, I guess, that I feel we need to address is, if there's going to be that sort of functionality out there, how do we go from where we are today to where I think we should be? And the rest of my deck here, for the most part, is a collection of 21 different suggestions I have. Now, some of these are pretty trivial, and I think we'll get there probably within the next year or so. Others, I think, are going to require a lot more thought and investment. And I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface here, right? So all of you could probably come up with a list of your own, and I hope that after this webcast that we can continue this dialogue and talk openly about some of these things. But so let me start with this list here. And the first item up is multi-format and DRM-free. And to me, I still have a hard time at the end of 2010 here thinking that this is an issue, but it's remarkable that when I go out and buy a book for my Kindle, for my iPad through the Kindle store on Amazon, that there's still a DRM wrapper. I also don't like the fact that when I buy something like that, even though I can read it on all sorts of different devices because Amazon has made those available, I don't really have anything but a Mobi file from Amazon. And this is one of the things, just to sort of tout O'Reilly's capabilities for a minute here, that I'm really proud of. For the last several years, if you buy an ebook from O'Reilly.com, what you'll find is all the popular formats, first of all. So you'll get PDF and you'll get EPUB, so you can read that in the iBook reader on your iPad. And you get Mobi, so you can read that natively on the Kindle and so forth, as well as a couple other formats. And also, there's no DRM. So, the thinking that we have behind this is that we trust our customers, okay? And I think that we've still got a long way to go, clearly, because there are so many publishers out there, and distributors for that matter, who are pushing out DRM'd products and just with one format. And I think we've got to get past that. So that's first on my list. Next up, speaking of platforms, this is something and a reason why I mentioned before, even though I don't use a Kindle device, I still buy all of my books from Amazon for the Kindle Reader. This was a really smart move that Amazon had, I think about 1.5 years or maybe even closer to 2 years ago, where I think they saw the writing on the wall and realized that if they're going to sell an ebook on Amazon for the Kindle, there are going to be other devices out there, and they've got to realize that they've got to have a presence there. And so I take comfort in knowing that whenever I buy an ebook from Amazon, that I can read it on my old Kindle if I want to. More importantly, I can read it on my iPad and my iPhone. I could read it from a Windows desktop. I could read it from my Mac desktop. I mean, BlackBerry, it's almost unlimited. And in fact, I updated this slide recently because they just added the Windows Phone 7 support. So clearly, they're going to continue adding that functionality going forward. And the problem I have, not to bash Apple, but I'm not buying anything from their bookstore because I'm pretty certain that when I do, I'm not going to be able to read it anywhere but on my Apple devices, and I just don't think that's a smart way to go. So this is more intended, I guess, for retailers. If you're not going to offer multiple formats, you've got to be able to support multiple platforms. Next up, social networks. I was at our Web 2.0 conference last month, and it was clear to me that social is just gaining more and more momentum. And I know that's sort of stating the obvious based on how Facebook has taken off over the last several years. But what's also, I guess, troublesome to me is to see that from a publishing and a content point of view, social networking is almost completely missing from our initiative. So, for example, if I'm reading a book on my iPad in a Kindle app, there's no way if I come across a really cool excerpt that I can quickly just press a button and tweet that excerpt, okay? And it's a little more complicated than that, because I suspect that before too long, and we've already seen, I think, some of the other readers come out with tweeting from within the app, so it's probably not going to be very long before we see that from Amazon and others. But it's more than just being able to tweet from within the e-reader app itself. I want to be able to point people to the content, okay? So think about Amazon's look inside or search inside the book feature, where you can check out some percentage of the content right on their website without having to buy it, kind of a try before you buy approach. I think that's got to go hand in hand with any sort of social networking effort within the e-reader. So talking about that scenario again, I'm on my iPad in my Kindle app, and I want to tweet this excerpt that I found. I want it to point right to that page in that book. Now, one of the things that you'll discover is that Google's book search offers that capability. You can send links to people, whether it's through your Twitter stream or through Facebook or whatever. You can point to precisely that paragraph on that page that you're talking about. And I suspect that's going to be a part of Google's eBook platform as well. But I'd like to see others adopt it as well. And the final point on this slide really is all about the affiliate program, because part of social networking and part of the reason why I think it's going to take off and become an important part of our world is because you want to encourage readers to share that content so that they can maybe get a cut of any sort of resulting sales. So again, I think you've got to have that built into the reader, and I think there's got to be an affiliate program component as well. Next up, this was a fun little mock-up I did. This is a screenshot from a book I was reading, actually finished it last month. It's from Nick Bilton, terrific writer for the New York Times. His book is called I Live in the Future, and I highly recommend it, by the way. But what I've done here is sort of mashed up the capability of capturing a screenshot on my iPad with a note-taking app on my iPad. I mean, I really wish you could do what I'm showing here in an e-reader app, but you can't. So what I've done is I've been able to go in and highlight, which yes, you can do within an e-reader app, but good luck trying to take a handwritten note and capture it, and also putting a post-it note on there. So it's that sort of thing that I'd like to be able to do, and maybe it's bringing together the note-taking capability app with the e-reader app. But I really think that this is going to be an important thing for the future here, because right now note-taking in an ebook is cumbersome, and it drives me nuts. So I don't do a whole lot of it. Whereas if I could just pull out a stylus and write this stuff right on the page, I think that's the stage that we've got to get to here. Next up, if you're going to take the time to create those sorts of notes, I think you've got to be able to have the capability to share them. So, in this case, what I'm talking about is, maybe I've read a great book that I want one of my kids to take a look at here. I'd like to be able to share those notes across the network. So if I'm again talking about Amazon and on the Kindle platform, I'd like to be able to send those marked up pages as notes to friends, relatives, book clubs, I think is another great example, classmates. I mean, just think about the capabilities here that you'd have with the school setting, where students within a class could sort of share their handwritten notes from their ebooks with the rest of the class, or a teacher could do the same thing. And you'll notice too, by the way, I put the arrows on this slide on both ends of the lines here. So, I'm not saying that it's a one-way communication. I think this has to be two-way. And again, that adds to the complexity. I realize that, but I think we've got to have the capability here to be able to share the notes and the thoughts that we're capturing along the way of reading these books. Speaking of which, this is an idea that I'd really love to see implemented. I'm calling it VIP notes, okay? And so here's what I mean. That image on the left that I had on the last screen is where I was talking about how I'd like to be able to create notes and share them with friends and family. Imagine if the next time you go up to Amazon, you're looking to buy an ebook and you found two versions of it, right? So that Nick Bilton book, for example, you found the standard version that I bought, and then you found the version that Bill Gates bought and read and marked up for notes. Imagine if you could pay a little bit more for that Bill Gates version and sort of get into his head to find out what he thought was really cool about it. And I suggest Gates only because I know he's a big time reader, and in fact I think he still does these little annual getaways where he takes a box of books with him and sits down, makes a lot of notes, and then comes back and shares with his colleagues a lot of his thoughts on them. So imagine if he were to do that. Now the question might be, why would he do that? Why would he share that publicly? Well, here's one good example. What if the incremental revenue that generated went to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? So in other words, the Nick Bilton book that I bought is X dollars. The Bill Gates edition of it is maybe $3 or $5 more. And what if all of that additional money went to a charity like that? I think that would be a really cool opportunity to get TV personalities, politicians, analysts, other celebrities to get involved in something like this. So I think that is a really fascinating concept to sort of tinker with for the future here. Next up, this is a screenshot of a service that Scribd is offering now. That's scribd.com. And if you're not familiar with them, you ought to go check it out. This is, as they refer to it, a social dashboard for reading. And admittedly, this, I think, is, at least in its current form, really more. Sorry about, did I get cut off?
Yes, you did, but you're back good.
Sorry about that. Okay.
It happens. Don't worry.
Okay. Anyhow, let me kind of take it from the top on this slide. Not sure if you heard me mention before, I've spent a fortune on textbooks for my two kids in college, and the used book market is just crazy because I just don't get anything back on that. So I think that the ebook world is an opportunity for us to sort of turn this model on its head, and here's how. So if you take that idea I mentioned earlier where you could capture handwritten notes and send them to your friends as part of the book, I think it would be really, really cool if you could do the same thing with textbooks and sell them as a used textbook. So again, maybe somebody's taking a calculus class and they see there are a number of options. They can buy the basic textbook with no notes, or they could go ahead and buy the one with the notes from you if you happen to be a really great note taker. And perhaps you're charging a little bit more because your notes add value to the class. Now, one of the drawbacks to this is that you probably start encouraging students from to not attend class, right? Because they've got all the notes that they need. Well, I would argue that that's happening already, thanks in large part to shared notes online to begin with, as well as the fact that a lot of classes, especially the bigger ones, are often done through webcasts and are recorded. So I don't know that that's really a problem that needs to be avoided. And on the other hand, what I think is really interesting about this is if you can resell it as a student and maybe even recapture your investment, if the model can be set up so that a retailer, the publisher, and the author can also be part of that revenue stream, then it's not a lost sale for anybody, right? It's just value added. Again, that's where I think used ebooks could be totally different from used books as they exist today. Next up, I'm stealing a line from Bob Pritchett, who is the CEO of Logos. And if you've never heard of them, they make and sell sort of a platform or a network of religious books, Bibles, and add-on materials. And Bob has spoken, I think, a couple times at our TOC conference. And the phrase he uses is selling the network as opposed to selling the book. And what he means by that is today, when you go out and buy a book from an ebook retailer, it's just another sort of standalone product in your library. There's no sort of linkage with what you've already bought. Logos, though, has really built their product in a linkable network format so that every product you buy from them connects with everything else. So all the searching, for example, goes across the entire network. And I think as publishers, we've got to think a lot more about that, how we can get away from selling just individual products to turning it into a model where we're building a network or a collection of content that is networked together for the consumer. And this was a I guess a problem that existed and still exists in the physical world, because you just can't do that with a print book. But because of the nature of eBooks, we can if we think about it, and we get away from just the quick and dirty print to e-conversions that I talked about earlier. Next up, the phrase "just long enough" here gets to spine width, and that's why I've included this image of a bookshelf with a bunch of titles spine out. I think one of the problems that we've often dealt with, certainly as publishers, is having a spine presence out there, making sure that you've got something that appears on the shelf and stands out. Well, obviously, in the ebook world, there is no such thing as spine. And frankly, I'm not sure that length has anywhere near the meaning that it used to. In fact, I would argue that I'm willing to pay more if you can condense things down and shorten the content for me. So I can't tell you how many business books in particular over the years I've read that were like 300 or 400 pages that really had about 20 or 25 pages worth of content to them, okay? And I'd like to see more opportunities where there are condensations of those books sold. And I know that there are things like Get Abstract and executive book summaries out there, but to me those don't really capture the essence of the product. I'm talking about short forms that are probably written by the authors of the original work themselves. And I would also argue that because you're saving me time, there are cases where I'd probably be willing to pay more for those short forms of the book than the long form. Again, because it's saving me time on my end. So this is another opportunity, I think, in the e-space where you really couldn't have done this in the physical print world, right? So you wouldn't be able to walk into a brick and mortar and find a 300-page book next to the 20-page condensed version of it. But in the e-world, I think this is a model that's absolutely worth trying. And again, particularly if it's done by the original author. I don't know about you, but anytime before I really bother buying an ebook, I grab the sample. Mostly because I want to make sure that it's worth the investment. And I just love the fact that I can get a sample very easily. It's typically a 1 or a 2-click process. And it's saved me a number of times from buying a dud. I've gotten 10, 15 pages into it, realized that it's not a book that I liked, so I never bought the finished product there. But I think we need to take it a step further, okay? I would love to see us incorporate in these e-reader apps, particularly on a mobile device like a smartphone, the capability for me to take a picture of a book. So maybe I'm talking to you and you're reading a book and I ask you about it. I can pull out my smartphone, snap a picture within my e-reader, and boom, the sample comes right to me. So I don't have to go to their website. I don't have to search for the title, and then I don't have to download the sample. It all happens through a one-click operation from my smartphone. This, to me, seems like a really simple thing to do in an e-reader app for your smartphone. And I think there's got to be a social network element too to this as well, because getting back to what I said before about friends and what they're reading and so forth, I think there's got to be an easier way for us to get these samples. And I just feel like leveraging the camera that's in the device that most of us are carrying around to begin with is a great way to do it. Next up, if you are reading books on your Kindle or an iPad or any other device, getting to the index can be kind of tricky. And I love the fact that, for example, when I'm reading in the Kindle app on my iPad, I can just touch the screen and there's a dictionary built in, right? So one-touch dictionary access. I don't see why we don't have the same thing for index lookups. So I'd really love to be able to see the capability to have that extended so that I can not only have a dictionary lookup, but that the index is built into that menu as well. And again, I think this is probably one of those areas that's going to be solved more in the short term than the long term. But to me, it's a gaping hole because the index is just not as easy to access as it should be for most ebooks. Speaking of indexes, this is an idea that I think would be really fun too. So you have sort of a static index in the back of a print book, and that's typically what's going to serve as the index ebook. But I'd like to see a dynamic angle to that added as well. And what comes to mind for me here is sort of the Wikipedia. So imagine the Wikipedia, but instead of a bunch of articles, it's just a bunch of links. Okay, so maybe you're the expert in a particular area, and you know the 5 top websites to go out to for a topic. And the example here I'll use is I read this wonderful FDR biography earlier this year, And when the author started talking about Hyde Park, I remember reading about Hyde Park years ago, but I don't know a lot of the background on it. And it would be great if I could just touch my screen, and in addition to having the index for the book pop up for Hyde Park entries, also have sort of the top 5 links out there on the web related to Hyde Park, so that I could just drop down real quickly and either go to a blog that happens to talk a lot about the history of Hyde Park, or a video maybe that gives me a tour through Hyde Park, for example. So what you have to think of then is this living index is something that's curated by the community, much the way the Wikipedia is today, so that somebody could go out there and change around the links if they felt theirs are more important than the ones that are there. And I realize that can create some tension there, but nevertheless, I think that it's a great way to build this thing out in an open format so that all publishers, all e-reader app builders could. Next up is something I've blogged a couple times about recently, and this has to do with QR codes. If you're not familiar with them, QR is quick response code. Probably started to see a lot of these appearing in ads. And actually, Nick Bilton's book that I mentioned earlier, he uses them in each of the chapter openers. And what's cool about it is, even though I read Nick's book on my iPad, I was able to then use my iPhone to snap a picture of at the beginning of each chapter, and it took me to a different link on his website that he wanted me to see before I read that chapter. So what this allows you to do is, and this is something that can be in play for both a print book or an ebook, you can start embedding these codes, which all they do is they take you to a URL out on the web. And what it allows you to do is quickly engage with video, let's say, for example. Maybe you've got a cookbook that shows and describes in the written word how to make a recipe. But now you'd like to see it presented in a video format. Well, wouldn't it be cool if each of those recipes had QR codes next to them? You could pull out your iPhone, snap a picture of it, and go ahead and watch as the author prepares that dish on a separate device. And I point out separate device because I think it's important to still have the first device dedicated to the recipe and all of the ingredients, and then maybe it's your smartphone that shows the author in video format preparing it. And that's just one simple example. There are a lot of other ways, I think, to integrate QR codes. And I'd like to see us start doing it more. And in fact, as I mentioned, it's really not just an ebook opportunity, it's a print opportunity as well. Gamification. Before I talk too much about this, if you get a second, you'll want to write down that URL, or if we can get it put into the Q&A window, that would be helpful, because that's a link to about an hour and a half long talk that this fellow, Jesse Schell, put together, that I listened to, I think, about 3 weeks ago on the advice of a colleague, Alan Noren. And it's really fascinating because Jesse is deeply immersed in the world of gaming, and talks about how gaming has the capability to sort of extend into so many other areas. And by the way, by gamification, talking about the concept that you can apply to basic elements that make games fun or addictive, the things that typically aren't considered a game. So, think about different types of books or other sorts of content that you want to read. And it's basically a way of turning work into play, okay? And again, I highly recommend taking the time to listen to what Jesse Schell has to say about that, because it really sparked a lot of thinking in my head about what sort of fun and even competitive elements we might be able to add to create more engagement. And the competitive piece, I think, is key. And I realize, again, this doesn't apply to every type of e-content out there. But I think that there are some types of e-content, and there will be more probably as time goes on, where there's a competitive angle to it. Maybe reading it is part of a game, or can be turned into a game and aspect to it. So again, this is one of those things that really can't be done in print, but it certainly has a lot of potential in the e-book. Okay, next up, give you a little background on this picture. This is a photo that my son snapped. We were together at a minor league hockey game about a month ago. We were both just amazed at how almost every square inch of the ice seemed to be covered with ads. And when it was clear like this, they jumped out at you. When the teams came out and played, it really wasn't a distraction. And in fact, if anything, I have to say, because of those Xfinity ones that are sort of towards the blue line there, every time guys crossed the blue line, I kept thinking about my DVR back home because it's Comcast, which is Xfinity. So I think as far as brand awareness goes, it worked pretty effectively. But the reason I bring it up here is that advertising is creeping into everything. And if you were to look at a hockey rink from really as recently as 15, 20 years ago, you would have seen just clear ice, and not even on the boards really were there. And clearly, this arena owner has realized that advertising is another way to sort of supplement or create supplemental income for them. And I know it's worked because you see it in NHL rinks around the league. And so what I'm suggesting here is that I feel that advertising, the time has come for, especially in the book world, for us to think seriously about advertising models. Now, before everybody hangs up and all you purists out there decide that I'm nuts, let me explain. I see two different ways of approaching this. So you'd offer the same ebook in two flavors, right? One would be as it exists today without ads, and the other one is one that has ads in it and is lower priced. So in other words, the ads are helping to sort of subsidize the overall revenue stream for the product. And by putting both out there, you can see which ones are more popular and make adjustments as necessary. I also wouldn't advocate, advertisements on every page. I think this has to be tastefully done and not really in readers' faces. But I do believe that it can be done, and I think we're going to see more of this. And whether we call it advertising or sponsorship, I think that it's going to be a model that we're going to see more of. And again, I would highly recommend that we do it with kind of a two-pronged approach so that customers can choose which one they. Let's talk now for a bit about the readers themselves. I've mocked this screen up here, and this is something that drives me nuts on my iPad. I know that with iOS 4 now, I can get quote-unquote multitasking going, so I can have tasks theoretically running in the background, even though I'm not doing much. But what I can't do is have more than one frame in an application or more than one application running at the same time, which I'll talk about in a second. And on the multi-frame side of things, I just think it would be really simple and valuable to allow readers to split the screen in two within the eReader app and be able to lock on one page while you're reading maybe from another. So in this case, what I've done is mocked up a screen to show how that would work if you were trying to repair a leaky faucet. So you'd want to be able to see both the diagram of the faucet as well as sort of the step-by-step instructions. And you could scroll independently on the bottom of the top part so that you could go step by step without ever losing the image of the faucet on the top. And again, this is something that's been in things like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and a lot of other desktop applications for a long time. I realize that not too many people are going to be all that interested in splitting the screen, let's say if they're reading a work of fiction necessarily. But there's just so many other applications for this, like how-tos I've shown here, cooking, reference guides. Imagine if it's a computer book and looking at an Excel screen and you want to follow steps on how to put together a formula and you want to have both shown without one scrolling off. I think this is just a natural. I like to think it's just a matter of time before it shows up in a lot of apps. Next up, as I mentioned just a moment ago, I think it would be great to take it a step further and to allow an application to run within another application. And the Kindle and the iBooks app on the iPad let you do Google searches within the book. And by within, I mean you can initiate the search within the book, but if you press that search Google button, you're abruptly taken out of the Reader app and into the browser. And to me, that's just not a very good user experience. So what I'd like to see is, take it all the way up to where I can touch the screen and I see the Google button and I touch it, but keep the book on screen and maybe pop up a frame below that or have a separate app in this case that can pop up on the screen and let me look at the information. In this case, I think this is a screenshot of a Hyde Park page that I was talking about before, and it's within that FDR biography I was talking about. So I'd like to be able to keep reading on the top within the e-reader app, while at the same time I can see another app sitting on top of it, and then it would just sort of drop down and go away whenever I'm finished. So again, I think this is something that clearly the capabilities exist today, but we just haven't taken the steps forward to implement. Here's one that just really blows my mind. I honestly don't have any idea why you're unable to search across your entire library. correct me if I'm wrong, but I've tried this in both the iBook store, in the iBooks app, for all the books I have you see on the screen there, as well as the Kindle app on the iPad. And anytime you search, you're limited to searching within the book that you're reading. I think we've got to get beyond that because I want to be able to quickly hop from one book to another. I want to be able to have that multi-frame approach too, where I can maybe have a couple books open at the same time. If it's a reference guide, for example, and I study both. So I'd like to be able to do something like this, and to me it seems like a really simple thing to. Another item that really drives me crazy. As smart as our devices are, it's remarkable that they don't talk to each other very well. Um, my iPad should know that my iPhone is nearby, for example. And I know that there's some add-on apps to do this that are dedicated to certain uses, but I don't see that at all today on the reading side of things. So here's the example. I'm reading a book that has a link to a video built into it. Rather than losing that precious surface area of my iPad to the video when I want to touch it, why not allow me to touch it on my iPad and have the video play automatically on my iPhone that's sitting right next to it? So through some sort of a Bluetooth connection or something else, I think that's a capability that's long. Another example would be, let's say a friend is reading a book on their iPhone and they want you to see an excerpt or to try the book. This is why I have the vertical arrow between the two iPhones here. If you're familiar with that bump app for the iPhone, you know that it's an easy way to touch phones and exchange contact information. Doesn't it seem natural that you should be able to do the same thing with your e-reader app so that I can quickly bump my device with yours and share maybe a sample or an excerpt or a piece, whatever, of an ebook that I'm reading? Okay, I think that's a capability that also shouldn't be that hard to implement and would enable, I think, a lot of content sharing and that social network that I talked about before, social networking capability to extend yet another degree. The last item on the list is a loyalty program, and that's not my keychain, but mine actually has even more than that on it. Those are, of course, the little cards that you can scan at the checkout counter, earn points or get discounts with various retailers. And it's amazing to me that we really haven't seen anything like this pop up yet in the ebook world yet. And I know, and of course, one of these actually is Barnes & Noble's membership program I'm part of. And that's helpful, but I'd like to see this as an option on the e-side because to my knowledge, you really can't apply that membership to any sort of ebook program. So whether it's buy two get the third one free, unlike in the brick and mortar world where you've got to buy all three of them at the same time. In the e-world, I could buy one today, I could buy a second next week, and then I could get a message saying, hey, you've earned this third free one. What would you like? So there's a way to make it a lot more dynamic than the way membership and loyalty program brick and mortar world. So I'm hoping that before too long we'll see loyalty programs in the content space. So that's my list, but before I wrap up, the other thing I wanted to mention is, even though I've referred to Apple a lot here, I have to admit that I'm really not all that loyal to Apple. In fact, at this point, I'm debating whether to switch from an iPhone to an Android next year, just because I feel like there's a lot more choice. And so that's, again, the beauty of having bought all these books from Amazon, is I know that I'll be able to read them there. So that's the extent of what I have to say today. I hope we can continue the discussion both at the end here in Q&A as well as at TOC next year and also on my blog. So we can open things up to questions.
Hey, Joe, what a great talk. We all enjoyed that so much here. A lot of new ideas going around. So there were a lot of questions, and you were talking about DRM-free books. And one was by Michael asking, interesting that Safari Books Online wouldn't work without DRM, and wanted a comment from you on that.
Well, I wonder if the question is about accessing the content, because, clearly it's behind sort of a paywall, so I don't know that I would consider that to be DRM.
Right. Good point. Good point.
It's a different model, let's say, and so I was talking really about standalone ebook sales.
Okay, all right. There was a funny question that just came in, and then without DRM, Michael had another question: How do you how do you sell used books?
Yeah, well, okay, so that's a great question. And what I would say is DRM goes away. So in other words, the restrictions of being able to share with others and so forth goes away. But the tracking ability and the management capability has to stay, right? And again, I think I mentioned this earlier that we trust our customers within O'Reilly and on O'Reilly.com, and that's why we don't advocate DRM. And in this model that I'm talking about, again, I think there's got to be some amount of customer trust that goes in it. But by the same token, in order to resell that book, I'm thinking it's probably part of a retailer's pipeline so that they're offering both original, non-used, if you will, ebooks as well as the ones with the notes in it that I was talking about before. So the short answer to that is it's not DRM that would have to be used, but it would have to be some sort of a management capability that's not restrictive.
Okay. There was a question from Ian that you would go back to slide number 7, the script talk, because
Sure.
that's when we lost sound.
Oh, okay, sure. Let me grab that one here. So
Okay.
would it be worth kind of a quick overview of this one?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so, and my apologies for the sound going away there for a moment, but what I was talking about is this is a screenshot from a service that Scribd offers. That's scribd.com, and they refer to it as a social dashboard for reading. So it's great for publishers and content owners to be able to go in and see where your content is being bought as far as geography is concerned. So, in North America, in Europe, or whereabouts, and you can see sort of that map that's towards the center of that screen. But what's also interesting, they provide a number of statistics here to show how much time is spent and how far people get in certain documents. So, one of the things I've always feared as a publisher is knowing at what point maybe did the majority of readers stop reading the book. And a tool like this can allow you to figure that out. And so I think it would be a terrific feature to see implemented on, the Amazon Kindle platform and iBooks and others.
Yeah. Sorry, there's some interesting comments coming through. Apparently,
I saw another question here, by the way. Do you need
okay.
indexes? Most reading apps have search that works quite well. So if I could address that for a second.
Sure.
Absolutely, no question that search can be an index replacement, but I tend to think that indexers exist for a reason, and they're able to take a look at content and come up with related phrases and so forth, synonyms that maybe you wouldn't think of and don't work in a straightforward search. So I'd like to have my cake and eat it too. I'd love to have easy index access as well as that quick one-touch search.
And talking about the search, when you were talking about that, people were posting a lot of comments about different types of readers. Like Patrick asked if Google Editions had searched across the library. But interestingly, someone just posted that iBooks updated last night, and now you can search across your library.
I saw they had added a feature to allow you to create virtual shelves, which again is long overdue. And I haven't had a chance to update the Reader app on my iPad yet, but so that's good to hear, and I hope Amazon follows that lead.
And do you know anything about Google Editions? Whether you can search across the library there?
I don't, and to be honest, and I blogged about this earlier in the week. I took a look at Google Editions last week and was underwhelmed. I mean, I really thought that after taking all this time for them to put a product together, that it didn't look like anything all that exciting to me. So I've pulled down a couple pieces of sample content, but I haven't played around enough with it to see whether it can search across. So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. All right. So Dan just posted an interesting question about Cory Doctorow publishing books and giving permissions for his readers to publish in ebook format, and wants to know, what do you think of his method?
So it sounds like the model is where Cory is sort of encouraging mashups and to take his content and maybe add to it or change it around. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, I think there again, that's another one of these things. That could have been item number 22. I think that's a great model that should be tested out, and I think we've got to spend more time trying things like that and seeing whether they get any traction. And then if they don't, maybe we tweak them or maybe we abandon them. But I think it's a wonderful idea. I think it would also be a challenge for obviously publishers who are locked into the DRM world to get their heads around. But yeah, I think it's really cool.
There's there's a lot of questions around DRM, but we have a couple others on different topics. So maybe we can jump to something else for a moment. When you were talking
Sure.
about ad revenue, Susanna asked if authors get any of the ad revenue or just the publishers. So how do you picture that?
That's a great question, and I don't think there's one simple answer because I could see some products where maybe the publisher and the author have agreed that the author's royalty rate is going to be higher so that the publisher can capture all of the advertising income. And in that world, maybe the publisher is more bullish on if they feel that there's upside to the ad income. On the other hand, an author who perhaps wants to take a risk, maybe they would agree to a lower royalty rate so that they could share the upside of the ad income. So that's something that really is not even publisher by publisher. I think that's going to be product by product and author by author to decide whether they want to opt in.
Interesting discussion. That'll be fun to watch where that goes. I mean, I know personally I cringe at the idea of ads in books, but maybe it'll work out nicely.
Yeah, I know. I've suggested it a few times on my blog and have gotten crucified for it. So I know there's a lot of people that hate the idea, but I think it's going to happen.
So Carter's asking a good question. With the ability to write and format one's own book, what is the purpose of a publisher in the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think publishers have to evolve, right? Because if we're stuck in the old model, I don't think we're adding enough value in the new model. And because the new model is evolving, I can't point out a laundry list here of the things that we have to do. But I mean, you see by some of the things that I presented today, and a lot of this I think requires retailers and resellers to embrace, but if they take it on along with publishers, then I think we've all got to figure out, okay, where is our spot in this world and where do we add value? Because you're absolutely right that if we stick with the old approach, then there isn't much of a need for publishers.
And if you don't mind, let's jump back to DRM.
Sure.
I know that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So Gary was saying EPUB format without DRM doesn't have a way to prevent the user from changing the book and repackaging it, which a lot of people would see as a threat to their content. And he wants to know, isn't this a serious problem?
Gee, I kind of think of that as a feature. I mean, I'm not encouraging somebody to go in and buy one copy, change it, and distribute it to everybody because that's wrong. But I just think it would be a really interesting concept if you had the ability to go in and tweak it like that. And that sort of gets back to that mashup question earlier. Will that take off at some point? And I think for some content it will, but it's going to require authors and publishers to realize that, and to embrace the fact that that's what they want to have happen.
And so the question I think that makes a lot of people in the publishing industry nervous is, do you mind? Aren't you worried about losing revenue when people are passing along your books for free or your textbooks for free?
No, and the reason why is, and fortunately we have great experience on this at O'Reilly because we've been doing this for so long.
That's true.
Yeah, we have seen our ebook business go through the roof this year, okay, and mostly direct, okay. So again, those are those multi-format DRM-free copies out there. And what's really interesting, and Tim mentioned this at a conference recently, that because I think we've established ourselves as trusting our customers and being partners with them, anytime a lot of times I should say, when a book gets released into the wild, we're being told about it by other customers so that we can go ahead and get it taken care of. Now, I don't for a minute think that we have got 0% cannibalization from people sharing or stealing content. I mean, that happens everywhere. I mean, let's be frank about it. The Harry Potter books aren't really available in an official digital format, but every time a new edition comes out, the latest one is on the torrent sites ready for download. So somebody scanned it in pretty quickly. So everybody's fighting this problem. And I just don't think, and I think corporately, we don't feel that DRM is really the solution. That instead we've got to trust our customers, and they in turn, like I said, will come back and help us hunt down the people that are breaking the rules.
Yeah, we've seen that ourselves here. It's pretty remarkable. So we're almost out of time, but we have a couple of questions that I think you can probably just put together to sum up. Carter's asking, so when is O'Reilly going to have all this stuff? And then in a similar vein, Agatha's asking, you, Joe, you're a publisher yourself, so how do you want to evolve in the 21st century?
Yeah, great question. So, again, of the 21 items here, I think a lot of them aren't in the hands of just a publisher, but I think the publisher has to be an advocate for them if they believe in it. And so, to answer both these questions at the same time, we've got to become advocates for a lot of these items, the ones that we believe in. And then for me personally, I've got to make sure that we're building lists like this and winnowing them down all the time and finding out what is most important. And today, since we're still in this quick and dirty print to e-conversion phase, I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And it's sort of baby steps at this point. And where I think it gets really exciting is when we're able to build models that have much more enhanced capabilities as opposed to just the e-rendering of the print product.
Well, it's going to be an interesting future, I think. And Joe, I just want to thank you so much for talking to all of us today about a subject that's very near to our hearts. And thank you also, everyone who joined us today. And it was a great crowd, great turnout, good information. So thanks, everyone. And Joe, we'll let you get back to your reindeer now.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
All right, and everyone who joined us today, we will have a recording of this available soon. We'll send you all a link as soon as we have that. Feel free to share it with your friends. And if you're going to TOC, one more time, we do have a discount code for that. It is TOC11OLC, and that gives you 15% off the current pricing. So we hope to see you all there. Thanks again. Goodbye.